Secretly hired in 2009, Monty was picked up by independent web animation studio Rooster Teeth between the production of Red vs. Blue Seasons 7 and 8. Both Monty and the company were big fans of each other's work. Over the next few years, he'd be a boon for Red vs. Blue with his signature fight choreography from his days as a one-man machinima animator, exciting staff and core viewers alike. Rooster Teeth was soon nearing the height of its popularity, with well-known online talents working with and for the company they were fans of, and their parasocial fiestas known as the RTX panels, such as the 2010 one that introduced Monty as a member of the studio via the Red vs. Blue 8 trailer. Of course, Monty had greater ambitions. He wanted to make a show of his own, one inspired by anime as well as cartoons that took cues from our Japanese tunes. Gathering friends and colleagues for animation and writing such as Shane Newville, Miles Luna, and Carrie Shawcross, Monty would work with the studio and spearhead his new creation in good old Studio 636, and it would soon become the biggest web animation in the West, if not the world, for an entire decade. Here's an anecdote from Carrie on how it got started.
He came in, late, but just because he was there overnight. And he was still kind of like half awake, and he just walked up to me and he said, "Red, white, black, yellow." And I said, "Yes, Monty, those are 4 colors." And he said, "No, that's a team. They're 4 girls." And I said, "Yes, Monty, go back to sleep." And then the next day he was like, "Hey, we should make an anime." And I was like, "Yes, that sounds great. I like anime. You like anime. Let's make a show."
Unfortunately, this isn't just the story of how a dream show would take the internet by storm. It's also the story of a studio's practices and culture slowly coming to light as the company started to decay, and how both that and the general decline of RWBY as a whole by the late 2010s would result in the show being left in an uncertain state. This is the story of a show whose ability to continue, let alone finish, fell into prayers and speculation until just this past year. This is the story of the dream that outlived Monty thanks to the efforts of his friends and the once brimming reception of his fans. This is the rise and fall of RWBY, starting with the Golden Age.
And so he went to his friend Carrie, who was also a huge anime nerd, and the two of them got real excited and then decided to grab their other friend Miles, who was scared but also excited to be a part of this. And together the 3 of those guys and a bunch of their other friends made the show called RWBY that at first everyone called RWBY.
When you catch even a glimpse of RWBY for the first time, you can feel Monty anime influence on full display. Aesthetically, it's clear how anime inspired a lot of its characters are, even before later volumes looked like they were populated by Kingdom Hearts and BlazBlue rejects. As we'd come to learn, Monty basically got Miles and Carrie to watch a bunch of anime like Cowboy Bebop, indoctrinating them into the fandom and allowing them to create some blatant allusions and references like the start of Chapter 1. Hell, in a Reddit thread, Miles would even list which ones he watched, and directly stated that in terms of how this show feels, Avatar: The Last Airbender would be the best comparison. They'd then make this crazy world of monsters, team and character names related to colors, passive and active anime powers unique to each character, passive and active energy shields to help characters beat the shit out of each other without being dismembered or turned into paste, and unique blades for everyone, most of which doubled as guns. That's only half of the show's aesthetic inspiration, however. Fairy tales and classical pieces of literature make up the other half, with the majority of even remotely relevant characters being direct allusions to specific works such as The Wizard of Oz or Pinocchio. Hell, I can even tell you which stories half of our main characters are referencing, such as RWBY with Little Red Riding Hood, and Blake being the Beauty and the Beast. If this tells you anything, let it be a phrase that you'll be heavily acquainted with by Part 3's end. Every volume of RWBY reflects its production. Sure, technically speaking, the quality of a production can be very apparent in a show's animation output and sometimes even its writing, pacing, and need for recap episodes or lack thereof, but in RWBY's case I mean that a bit more directly. That being said, I'm getting ahead of myself. I haven't even shown the first results of their labor yet. In November 7th, 2012, not long after Red vs. Blue Season 10 came to a close, the first of 4 trailers would be released, where an enigmatic scythe-wielding red-hooded girl cleaved tons of black monsters in a snowy white field, set to the iconic Red Light Roses by Jeff and Casey Williams. Each trailer showed one of 4 girls representing a specific color to varying degrees: red for Ruby, white for Weiss, black for Blake, and yellow for Yang, with fun battles, mostly great songs, interesting scenarios, wooden dialogue and voice acting for the latter two notwithstanding. These were tremendous successes, pretty much selling the upcoming show that would air less than a year after the first trailer in July 2013. And at this point, anyone watching this video likely knows the gist of the show. Ruby, Weiss, Blake, and Yang train in this battle academy called Beacon to fight monsters that are attracted to negative emotions. They become a team and make friends with others. There's an oppressed minority group that has a terrorist faction somewhere, there's crime bosses running amok, and eventually our heroes have to save the world by traveling to the rest of the 4 kingdoms of the world to retrieve certain artifacts and shit. Volume 1 covers pretty much the first half of that whole premise, and can be broken up into 5 pieces. Chapters 1 through 3 are the introduction, 4 through 8 make up the Forest Trial arc, 9 and 10 follow up on Ruby and Weiss's conflict from said arc, 11 to 14 give John an arc, and 15 and 16 give Blake and Weiss a conflict to end the volume on. Despite being an unusual 16 episodes, or chapters if you will, the volume only lasts about 2 hours. But before we delve into those implications, I want to circle back to the whole RWBY reflects its production thing. The first volume of RWBY parallels its production in the sense that a bunch of amateurs, some of whom have pre-established relationships with each other, come together to become part of something greater, figuring things out and dealing with some rough edges. In a metatextual sense, this is kinda how the production was like, and you can feel that. Monty grabbed his writer friends, Miles and Carrie, and gave them a bunch of anime to watch so they could understand his vision, and they worked together with their colleagues to give us a sometimes fun but often clumsy first outing in what was very much Miles and Carrie's first major series.
We were just bootstrapping the whole way and having to creatively patch all sorts of new problems that we could only guess at but couldn't foresee until we were actually in the heat of production.
How they'd often have to write for this show after hours during RWBY Season 10's production. With all that being said, I want to start off my dissection of the volume proper by exploring the positives. I did become a fan for a reason after all, though that was back in 2014, when I was 14. Wow, that was the perfect age for that. The humor doesn't land too consistently, but there is a ton of fun banter between all the characters here. The most obvious standout is Nora, who is basically the sitcom wildcard of the secondary cast.
Oh! We'll break his legs!
There are other highlights such as the iconic
Birdie, no!
and that time Weiss lamented RWBY leaving her behind to be taken away by a Nevermore.
How could you leave me? I said jump.
She's gonna fall.
She'll be fine.
She's falling.
The humor is sort of like a kid's sitcom cartoon, and it works some of the time. It also helps that the poser engine is just stiff and robotic enough for the animation team to play with it, as characters activate and deactivate on command. Plus, you can make fun of the shadow people all you want, but they do have their charm. Even with these VTuber-ass models, Monty & Co. still managed to get some cool dynamic action sequences, with the obvious standout being the gunchucks moment during the Sun and Blake vs. Roman fight in the finale. This fight as a whole set the bar for future battles to live up to, and even with the monster battles being either really weak or wacky but fun, like the big fight against the Nevermore and the Manta at the end of the Forest arc, it's not like early RWBY has a bad batting average. A lot of the character designs are simple and interesting enough, while also being very much discount anime in some respects, though the latter applies more to the secondary characters like Team Juniper as opposed to Team RWBY, at least for now. The music is also wonderful here. Of course, there's the iconic alternative metal OP, This Will Be the Day by Jeff and Casey Williams, but Jeff Williams also has a very lively score dedicated to individual chapters, with my favorite across the entire series being The Shining Beacon Part 2. The track goes from this grandiose, inviting melody to something more lush and eventually ominous, before settling in on a beautiful send-off chime as Blake blows out the lights on the episode. It also helps that the scene that takes up the latter half of the track is one of the best in the volume. For what it's worth, disregarding the trailers, the characters do get solid introductions, and RWBY herself is incredibly likable. For an extremely childish and naive 15-year-old, her optimism is honestly one of the best examples I've seen in an MC. She has her own fun, weapon-loving eccentricities, sure, and she does get extremely embarrassed by Yang's big sisteriness or violently childish with her extreme murder weapon at one point because of Weiss. However, moments like Blake and Ruby's first back and forth were great.
As a girl, I wanted to be just like those heroes in the books, as someone who fought for what was right and who protected people who couldn't protect themselves.
That's very ambitious for a child. Unfortunately, the real world isn't the same as a fairy tale.
Well, that's why we're here. To make it better.
And oh look, here's that thing I mentioned a few minutes ago with Blake and Ruby's fairy tale focus and inspirations. You can tell I started creative writing because I'm being such an obnoxious prick. These scenes and aspects speak to a homely, warm demeanor she carries on the inside. Hopeful and duty-driven, but not ignorantly or dangerously so like one might think for the most part. Childish and unrefined, sure, but with a palatable sense of earnestness.
I am so far beyond worrying. In a good way, in a bad way, in a very bad way. Well, why don't we just jump? What are you, insane?
When I was rewatching this volume, you have no idea how much I missed this version of RWBY, especially what we get from her for the first 9 chapters, since let's just say the Mistral Saga onwards does away with all that. Anyways, you might notice I wasn't all that substantial, or I guess granular, with my praises of the volume. And that's because while I can have some fun with it here and there, it's honestly kinda bad. It starts out fine enough, even if a lot of the characters can feel kinda basic and uninteresting for a while. Some scenes and ideas in the Forest arc have very little cohesive flow to them, and the big fight at the halfway mark does mark the first of many instances where RWBY claims to have a plan only for everyone to just do their own thing, and that ends up being the quote-unquote plan. However, the first 10 chapters are still at least acceptable. At its best, we get stuff like Weiss and RWBY's conflict of maturity, kindness, and leadership, which ebbs, flows, and escalates pretty quickly, yet organically, with each side being easily understandable before Weiss finally sees RWBY's perspective in her own way before mellowing out. It's not great. The talks each character has with different professors to help clear their mind don't feel quite right given what they know and were there for. But I do like that even afterwards, while RWBY takes her professor's words to heart and begins studying hard, Weiss comes to her conclusion on her own after seeing that, instead of just because she was scolded. It's a relatively effective, possibly even underrated aspect of the volume. Though, even here you can tell that Monty, Miles, and Carrie are still working some of the characters out because Blake just completely drops her standoffishness come chapter 9, and it's honestly pretty jarring. By this point, RWBY has also pretty much lost her weapons geek side entirely, and it's never coming back outside of one specific fighting game crossover half a decade later. I'm so upset about that. Worse yet, the last 6 chapters are where the volume really begins to fall apart, and they do so in ways that spell trouble for the series in hindsight. Let's start with the Jaundice arc, chapters 11 through 14. It's a horribly tried bully conflict, with depictions of racism and general bullying so crass and blasé, and it's like a bad episode of a mediocre kids cartoon. The main cast has absolutely no involvement in this arc either outside of RWBY giving her friend John a leadership pep talk halfway through. Even though, as we've seen and will focus on real soon, Weiss and Blake have some very strong stances on the issue of faunus rights, and would probably react and bicker regarding the open physical assault the art's antagonist, Cardin, is causing on this rabid faunus student named Velvet. This is honestly more of a prop for Team Juniper conflict, where John gets bullied, and has his personal inadequacies as a leader exploited. Interestingly enough, this week Vomit Boy's revealed to have faked his transcripts, explaining why he's unusually terrible at combat for a Beacon Academy student, just in time for Cardin to overhear everything and blackmail him with either doing everything Cardin says for a while, or letting the truth be exposed so that he could get kicked out. It forces John to be more distant with his team and act like a subservient quote-unquote friend to Cardin, lending to some friction. Dubious setup aside, this conflict seems fine on paper, but there are 3 issues, one of which I already covered with Team RWBY, so let's tackle the bigger ones. First is the fact that we barely got to know Team Juniper at this point, and they hardly got much of a chance to interact. They did have some sparse interactions outside of the dynamic duo of Nora and Ren, but that was all in the Forest arc, chapters 4 through 8. The Jaundice arc takes place 3 weeks after the first 10 chapters of the volume, but it might as well be the next day. We don't have a well-established team dynamic or identity for its disruption to carry any weight. We did see some inklings of the powerhouse Pyrrha coming to like John beyond just her being lumbering and nice, but the threatening of John's relationship with everyone, including her, doesn't feel earned, and therefore neither does the growth in this specific pairing's bond following the resolution where John lets her help train him. It's almost on the level of watching the first Teen Titans episode, where Cyborg and Robin split up after an argument like 2 minutes after we got introduced to everyone for the first time. Like, why should we care? The idea that he's this upstart who cheated his way in and really needs to prove himself is fine. The idea that he wants to do so his own way and needs to learn to accept help from his friends when he's clearly out of his depth is alright, especially when upon being pressured, John spills to Pyrrha how he forged his way in. It's just that we should have spent some time actually getting to know these guys before all this happened, especially since the way the arc plays out is painfully trite. So yeah, this arc sucks balls on both a micro and macro level, and it's indicative of a major issue with the show regarding how it takes the audience's attachment to the characters for granted. This leads into something bigger, something that intertwines with the first 2 bullet points on why this arc is terrible on a macro level. It's the issue of pacing. Remember, we only have 2 hours to tell Volume 1's story, with 14 4 to 6 minute chapters and 2 10-ish minute ones. So tell me why we spent 4 of them, a whopping quarter of the volume, on pretty much just John, Pyrrha, and Cardin, instead of finding better ways to flesh out Team Juniper or letting more of Team RWBY than just Ruby herself have any involvement whatsoever. It feels like a detour with an underwhelming payoff as opposed to a welcome bit of character development, and worse yet, it takes crucial time away from the main cast, which could have also been spent fleshing out more of their dynamics, or at least reminding us of Blake and Weiss's tensions regarding the Faunus, given that the latter is kind of the main focus of the final arc, which only has 2 chapters compared to Jaundice's 4! Time management is going to be a real issue for RWBY in the coming volumes, but the Jaundice arc is patient 0 for this shit. All it takes is for the stowaway son to be introduced, running from the cops, giving Blake the winky face, and fucking off before Weiss starts going ham about that dirty, filthy monkey like Frieza from Dragon Ball Z.
The filthy faunus from the boat!
Naturally, Blake doesn't take kindly to that, and after Penny is introduced and we get a cute callback to an early interaction between RWBY and Weiss.
Sensational! We can paint our nails and try on clothes and talk about cute boys!
Oh, is this what it was like when you met me?
Wanna hang out? We could go shopping for school supplies.
Yeah, and we can paint our nails and try on clothes and talk about cute boys like tall, blonde, and scraggly over there.
Well, really?
No.
The White Princess Karen's up again, and Blake takes the argument back to the dorms where it turns out that the white liberal was a minority! And suddenly it makes sense to everyone who skipped all the trailers why she was so personally involved. The scene of her and Weiss shouting at each other was solid. Again, we get to see both perspectives in detail. Weiss hates the Faunus not just because of the Schnee family or even her home kingdom's view on these animal people, but also because the terrorist organization, the White Fang, was constantly at war with their family, and that led to several funerals and her father getting particularly angry in a way that seems to get taken out on the family, if her typical childhood line is any indication. Meanwhile, Blake champions the rights of the oppressed whom the Schnee Dust Company actively exploits through slave labor, refusing to budge even after all of that before finally letting loose that,
Well, maybe we were just tired of being pushed around.
before running off. It would have been nice for there to have been some more tension between the two early in the volume, so this explosion of emotions could feel that extra bit more heightened, but still, good scene. Again, perhaps the most substantial and even underappreciated aspect of Volume 1's writing, which would be largely absent in later years, is the idea that everyone can have valid perspectives, or at least valid experiences underlining those perspectives. Sure, Weiss is usually more in the wrong than anyone else, but she's still right about Ruby, and it's not like Blake was able to really counter Weiss's experience helping to motivate her bigotry. Hell, to anyone who says Volume 1 aged poorly due to Weiss having the character flaw of being a racist, maybe come back to this scene in our current political climate. We'll come back to this in later volumes, but V1 shows that everyone can still have valid points and criticisms against each other, even if one person ultimately looks worse and has greater flaws than the other. It's just a shame that, unlike with Weiss and Ruby's conflict, the tension between Weiss and Blake will not have an acceptable conclusion. Blake runs off and leaves her beau behind to confirm to the audience that we really did include her as a cat faunus before the fun, jovial son compliments her and they run along to talk about the White Fang, and... Oh, I have to talk about this landmine now. Well, as I've said in the Jaundice arc, this show's depiction of racism is pretty juvenile. Weiss is the best we get and is leagues ahead of Cardin, but let's just say that Miles and Carrie would come to regret how they handled this topic for a reason.
And we were like, I think it would be really interesting and really important to have a show with, there's some segregation and let's talk about racism and minorities and stuff. And I think we were a little too ambitious for a 15-minute, at the time, 5-minute long show, especially with just like 2 white guys writing it.
The White Fang was originally a civil rights group, peacefully advocating for equal rights for the faunus. But after a while, new leadership took over, and their demonstrations became more violent. It was a new, more extreme way of thinking, one that netted them more results at the cost of their reputation. So not quite as long as Weiss implied, given that she's like 17. The White Fang became terrorists, and as the Black trailer showed, Blake had actually left them during an operation as her morals couldn't tolerate the killing her organization had been doing any longer. We can tell that this plot is meant to recontextualize the Black trailer, which again leaves me asking why nothing about any of this was built up at all in the background after like Chapter 2. Parallels have been drawn between the White Fang and the Black Panthers, the latter of which was a black civil rights group in 1970s America, whose expanding influence scared the government into finding a multitude of ways to annihilate them. Hell, even the name, White Fang, reads like a play on Black Panthers. And let's just say that given what I've stated so far, there's a bit of cognitive dissonance many RWBY fans had to perform to stomach this overarching subplot. Yes, this is one of the major plot lines in the series. Weirder still is how the series of White Fang forces performing the dust robberies in Vale turn out to be led by a white guy, a human at that. Given their sheer apprehension towards humans, it seems off, even if they justify why a subgroup is led by him and his associates in the next volume. Still, Sun is a pretty fun side character for Blake to bounce off of, and while Roman Torchwick was present in Chapter 1 for his original goons to get their asses handed to them, he really makes his presence known here. Roman is a fun 2-bit crime boss who's smarmy and expressive as hell. Props to Grey Haddock, he really did a great job acting like a seedy, bigoted businessman. While that stuff's all going down, the rest of Team RWBY argues about if they should even try to find Blake, or if she's criminal scum who should be either abandoned or turned in. They run into Penny, who upon hearing Blake wasn't what she thought everyone was, makes a comment that hasn't aged well.
Is she a man?
And then lets them know how obvious it was that Blake was a faunus, and then they split up. We hardly get much follow-up on this. Very little of Weiss being called out for being a modern virtual Karen, and yeah, do you see why this arc could have benefited from at least one more chapter to really let the team better explore all this? After all, chapters in Volume 1 are literally just 4 or 5 minutes for the most part. It only takes like 2 scenes. And then the big fight happens. It's cool, but only really Blake and Sun get involved until Penny arrives with RWBY to bust out some cool sword laser powers to BTFO Roman and his White Fang squad. Also, yeah, RWBY, Weiss, and Yang have no involvement in the final battle of Volume 1. I ask again, you see why we needed more time for this arc yet? It feels like they had to wrap it up quick, so even though the bad guys are stealing Schnee Dust Company goods, and the finale of Volume 1 is the perfect time for the main girls to team up and show everyone what they're made of, we don't get shit. Hell, the resolution to Weiss and Blake's conflict is similarly underwhelming, with her arriving at the aftermath and telling Blake, "Oh yeah, all this shit doesn't matter to me anymore. Water under the bridge if he promised to be more open and forward about this with us, let's start over. Teamsies! We're teamsies, right?" You know, before still giving Sun the verbal stink eye. She doesn't even offer a fucking apology, like what the shit? I've seen some fans say that Weiss being racist was itself problematic, but no, the problematic part is them not adequately taking her to task for her bullshit, or even getting her to apologize for it. She basically lectures Blake on opening up to the team and calls it a day. Like, what the fuck? Like, man. Let's just say that in spite of my laundry list of issues with the anime RWBY Ice Queendom, it really did have to patch up a lot of what the original version of this arc left out. Though we'll talk a bit more about the anime later in part 3. So yeah, RWBY Volume 1. It was alright at first. It had some promise here and there, but the second half was honestly pretty terrible after the RWBY and Weiss stuff. Much of what was good about this entry as a whole was either mildly amusing or in desperate need of elaboration. I didn't even mention other weird oversights like how come the dust shop has no security when dust is such a critical energy source for our world in pretty much all fields, including combat, when fucking jewelry has significantly greater security measures in real life. And if I tried to point out all the weird lore oversights and inconsistencies beyond just some of the more offensive ones, discussing each volume would take even longer than it's already gonna take. And trust me, just wait until parts 2 and 3. We're already gonna be here forever, why do you want me to add another day to the clock? And trust me, later volumes will beget this approach far more as their issues become grander and the connections with and contradictions to previous volumes run much deeper. I'll try to only do so here and in the next 2 volumes when absolutely necessary. Like when something important to the plot hinges on it, or a contradiction is just that galling. I'm not even gonna touch how the schools are run, because thinking too hard about RWBY lore gives me a fucking headache. The volume itself is aimless as well, amounting to a loose connection of unrelated stories by the second half that don't do enough for the cast to justify the approaches taken. The final arc feels like the volume remembered it was running out of time and needed to conjure up some sort of conclusion at the last second. They remembered the SDC and Roman existed and just slapped it all together with the racism stuff they also just remembered Weiss and Blake had conflicts about. But yeah, the scope of Beacon alone far surpasses what they could show in just 2 hours with what they were trying to tell. I know so little about Beacon as a school other than it has 2 professors who both teach history and or their own personal anecdotes, a combat instructor, a headmaster, some dorms, and a dedicated combat room. This does not get better as the series goes on either. We barely learn any more about this damn school by the time Volume 3 burns it to the ground. That's something that annoys me in actual school battle anime like Chivalry of a Failed Knight and the Asterisk War. The combat schools are so nebulous that the school part feels like a vague suggestion, even though the combat side of Chivalry of a Failed Knight is significantly more well realized than the Asterisk War or RWBY. This setting's just a mess. Volume 1 laid such a terrible foundation for the show on almost all fronts, and that's the ultimate problem that makes it so much worse than the sum of its parts. And keep that phrase in the back of your mind too, I'm gonna be saying it a lot. So yeah, to put it nicely, there was room for improvement, and by God did they get that chance. Let's look at the facts. Rooster Teeth back in 2013 wasn't what it was today. Monty, Miles, and Carrie were at good old 636, working on this anime stand-up as the new kid on the RT block. Red vs. Blue was a big internet hit, but they needed something new, not just for the RT fans, but for the newcomers as well. And anime just so happened to be the ticket. The latter half of the 2000s was when anime started not just having the odd mainstream title here and there, but also getting more than one per year, from the days of Death Note, Haruhi, and Code Geass in 2006, to Fairy Tail and Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood in 2009. By 2013, we already started getting juggernauts that would rival Death Note and even the big 3 in popularity, not just dominating the casual market, but defining much of the anime landscape and Western fandom for years to come. And at the height of it all were Sword Art Online and Attack on Titan, the latter of which exploded so hard in 2013 and 14 that even your parents who watched Game of Thrones instead of anime knew about it. Anime was on the rise internationally, even more so than in the 2000s when kids grew up on the Toonami block and anime-inspired hits like Samurai Jack, Teen Titans, and Avatar. Needless to say, that crowd, the 13 to 20-year-old anime fan, was huge in 2013. The anime landscape, even regarding Western fandoms and YouTube, was beginning to resemble what we know today. And a lot of you probably know this already. Us plebes and weebs were there, intrigued by those trailers and ready to see the action, and we, alongside much of Rooster Teeth's core fanbase, catapulted the Volume 1 premiere up to new heights beyond what the company had ever seen before. It had so much good grace for anime nerds, RT fans, cartoon bros, and even fans of Monzi's machinima work that we were all chomping at the bit for more. Volume 2 was going to prove to us that V1 was more than just a promising start. It was going to polish itself up and turn the show into a mega franchise, a true internet sensation. After the unprecedented success of Volume 1, RWBY would receive a Japanese dub. The show's popularity in Japan would soon become its own triumph. All the while, Volume 2 was slated for a July 2014 release, approximately a year after the debut of its predecessor, codifying the production cycle for the rest of the series. Sort of. Put a pin in that for Volume 3. Still, if you somehow aren't convinced of how huge and dedicated RWBY's fanbase was becoming, then let RTX 2014 put your skepticism to rest.
Hey guys, and welcome to RTX 2014. As you can see, we've already got a huge crowd here for RWBY. This started filling up at around 9. We got here like 9:30 and it was already a huge group. I'm really excited. I think a lot of people are going to be really excited to see this.
We saw the premiere of Volume 2, which I did not record a second of because I'm not that much of an asshole. I did get to ask a question though.
So we've heard in past how the actors and actresses kind of get into the head of their characters to kind of get ready. As the writers, when you're trying to write like Blake or Nora, like how do you get into their heads and write them? I do a lot of hip movements.
Yeah, a lot of people also like go back and like rewatch old episodes and like just try and like get into the mindset of the characters.
All the while, Rooster Teeth had expanded its staff so much that they went and found a new base of operations. That base turned out to be a former hangar in Texas. News of the lease made its way in March for Stage 5 in Bungalow A during production of Volume 2. The studio and their new cash cow were ascending rapidly, and Gray Haddock would be in charge of the animation department. For this sophomore outing, Monty, Mouse, and Carrie really wanted to step things up. The shadow people that made up V1's background characters were gone and replaced with actual human models. Lots of new characters entered the fray, even last-minute additions like Neo. The main girls got fresh new outfits for part of the volume. The humor and character focus were expanded upon. Motivations and backstories were brought to the forefront. The volume maintained an overarching plot this time around, as opposed to being a series of loosely connected mini-arcs. The chapter count shifted from an unusual 16 to a much more typical 12, while making each one about 11 minutes. This made for a longer volume, which would resemble the show's future endeavors. We may not get character trailers this time around, but we don't need them anymore, at least for 2 more volumes. In many ways, Volume 1 was the trial run of the show, and Volume 2 was where the team truly laid their foundations. Kinda like how now the members of Team RWBY have sort of simmered down and are ready to take on larger tasks, now that they've ironed things out. You know, because every volume of RWBY reflects its production. V2 can be divided into 3 4-chapter chunks. There's the end of the first semester / start of the second, where Roman's back at it again with the White Fang. There's the middle portion, which focuses on the toll of the previous arc had on Blake, while everyone prepares for the school dance, and the lead up to everyone going on an assigned mission after Roman's boss installed a virus and fended RWBY off. And then there's the final 4 chapters, which are left to focus on the mission Team RWBY has just been assigned to, and how they stumble upon a potentially city-ravaging operation that was way more than they bargained for. RWBY herself is generally tackling things just as she did throughout much of Volume 1, minus the spats now that the team has fully come into their own. She enjoys the here and now as best she can, handling most challenges given with a hearty smile on her face, and being just as much of a goober as ever, even if she still has her uncertainties. Weiss has undergone a major shift from Volume 1, losing to racism entirely, and just generally being a lot less mean, a little less high-strung. You can already see the problem with all that, but I'll detail that shit later. Blake starts off fine now that V1's events have long since passed, but the death of an old acquaintance and the past coming back to haunt her start leading her into a self-destructive path. As for Yang, she's handling things as well as RWBY, but now that she's not needing to look after her sister anymore, the team mom senses are noticing what's going on with Blake. Then in the final arc, we get to learn more about their motivations for coming here, as everyone sans RWBY shares this information with one another. As such, it's clear that while Volume 1 was about people learning to come together and work aside their differences, Volume 2 is about maturity, enjoying the last vestiges of your youth as you start to tackle bigger obstacles like the grown-ups you and your friends are becoming.
They're supposed to be the defenders of the world.
And they will be, but right now they're still children. So why not let them play the part? After all, it isn't a role they'll have forever.
As for how well it does all this, it's better than Volume 1 in many ways, and certainly less uneven, but it's still pretty shaky, noticeably towards the end. I definitely had more fun than last time, and the comedy is sharper than ever, but the character work is still very wonky, and the overall narrative of the volume isn't much better than last time. I'm certainly not gonna say this is where RWBY gets good or anything, even though a lot of people consider either this or Volume 3 to be that. Still, let's start with the positives. One thing I'll say right off the bat is that Volume 2 has a much tighter script than its predecessor. While the devil is in the details, the pacing and just surface level events of the plot are much stronger this time around, especially now that the volume's given us a more standardized RWBY chapter runtime of about 10 to 15 minutes, instead of the 3 to 5 minute chapters that made up much of Volume 1. It never feels like we're spending an inordinate amount of time on one character or story at the expense of everything or everyone else. We're not gonna spend 4 chapters on one guy whose team we just saw form up to focus on him pushing everyone away due to a bully who started off being racist to some other girl who otherwise has nothing to do with the fucking volume. No, we're gonna give the endgame the time it actually fucking needs. Sure, some of what I just said is like, yeah, no fucking shit. You just said a minute ago that V2 has 3 4-minute episode chunks, where V1 goes all 3, 5, 2, 4, 2. Of course the pacing's better. To anyone expressing that, 1,
you can shut up now.
2, having a more even structure doesn't inherently mean much if the contents within have a harder time fitting into or needing to reach that quota compared to a more freeform and unstable beast like V1's structure. Just look at Volume 7, that incompetent piece of shit. You are so fucking lucky that you're right in this case, because no other volume structures itself like this, and you can feel how simultaneously dragged out and blitzed later volumes are. Just wait till I get to Volume 5, holy shit!
Oh my god, you're gonna rewatch that? If I were in your position, I'd kill myself.
Damn, that bad. Hey, wait a second, isn't this the volume where you quit?
Yes, and I'm still alive.
Oh. Volume 2 is quite possibly the best time management of the series, which will be made clear as day when we look at the rest of the show. Volume 2 doesn't stand still or dwell on things longer than it has to. It has a bit more time to kill, about a half hour more than before, but it's not gonna waste that time like some later volumes will. All killer, no filler, and boy oh boy, let me tell you, this volume will make you die of laughter. This is easily the funniest entry in the series. Sure, Volume 1 had its moments, but Volume 2 spends as much time doing plot and character stuff as it does cracking banger joke after banger joke. We even get more visual gags which take advantage of Poser's physics engine. Gags sometimes go in and out of the background of a scene. We get moments like Neptune being pushed into place only to be in a completely different pose the next time we see him, and the script is punched up a lot compared to Volume 1. So much of the runtime is peppered with weird, over-the-top bullshit where characters engaging snipes and banter with each other. On the visual side of things, while Volume 2 would probably be laughed out of most productions, look at how Fully Coolly Grunge is doing when it looks not too far off from these early volumes. It's certainly a step up from before. As I've stated, the shadow people are out, and fully realized background models are in. Characters get snazzy new outfits for the latter half of the volume's first arc, and they're widely considered some of, if not the best character designs for our main 4 girls. The abundance of extra visual gags compared to Volume 1 further show how much more dedicated the team was to getting the most out of the Poser engine. We get plenty more fights between the characters compared to last time, where it was pretty much localized to small bits against Roman and his henchmen. These fights tend to do much more for choreography than the battles against the Grimm. Stuff like the food fight in Chapter 1 and Neo vs Yang in Chapter 11 are widely held up as some of the best fights in the entire series. The former is an over-the-top spectacle that, aside from some cuts not feeling quite right from an editing perspective, show the series at its most bombastic yet. It's a 4-minute extravaganza where every member of Team RWBY and Team Juniper gets time to shine before RWBY ends it all in a finish so explosive it fundamentally breaks any power scaling for the rest of the series. It's silly, goofy fun that sets the bar for the series moving forward. I can only imagine how hype it was for the people who saw the RTX preview for Chapter 1 and witnessed this fight, which absolutely topped the Nevermore and Deathstalker fight from the Forced Exam. Hell, even the fight against the Paladin in Chapter 4 can only rival this with the highway chase and eventual 4-on-1. Though that's partially because the Paladin mech looks like shit. This fight also introduces things that will break the series. And then there's Neo vs. Yang, a squash fight that showcases a level of finesse and pinpoint precision in movement that hadn't really been seen in the show prior, as Neo effortlessly evades all of Yang's punches and systematically decimates her before flinging her into the ceiling of a train car, knocking her unconscious. This level of 3D hand-to-hand combat with almost no breaks is still impressive, especially when you compare that to how janky the characters move in plenty of non-combat sequences. Stuff like this and the pier fights in Chapter 5 remind me of why even most of RWBY's detractors are still willing to say stuff like, RWBY's great if you just watch the fights on YouTube, as opposed to saying, disregard the show in its entirety, it's fucking AIDS.
RWBY could have just been a collection of fun fights uploaded on a YouTube channel, and all it would have lost is several hours of baggage.
The choreography, the music, the slow-mo, the sound effects? Shit's kinda hype this volume, not gonna lie. I forgot how fun some of these sequences were. And sure, the volume is still clippy as shit even in these fights, but here it feels like you stepped out of a 2-hour 3D film student production and into, say, something you'd see from Monty's Machinabridge fight videos. Or even some fights in Modern Death Battle. Sometimes the volume can be a bit bright, and the clubhouse scene is really at risk of triggering epilepsy. But overall, yeah, the visuals are a couple notches above Volume 1. For a CG web production in the mid-2010s, that's not half bad, I'd say. The music's still solid with a fair share of epic tracks, like the part of Painting the Town that plays during the chapter's highway chase scene. There's also the insert Die, which plays towards the end of the chapter's Paladin fight, as well as the ED Sacrifice, both of which further show the more epic, ominous direction the series is trying to take itself into. The OP, It's Time to Say Goodbye, also has a neat verse, even if the song isn't exactly my favorite like it is for a lot of other RWBY fans. But yeah, let's talk about those characters, shall we? After all, Volume 2 is a character-driven volume. Blake's arc is the most pronounced of the gang, and it's fine, but I can't help but feel like something's missing here. Following the events of Chapter 1, Blake has started getting paranoid about the White Fang, so much so that her constant looking into any possible leads on them has caused her to become even snippier and more reclusive than ever. She slowly starts developing some serious dark bags between Chapters 4 and 5, meaning it's been at least a couple weeks since she started restlessly scrambling for information. The actual beats of the arc are fine. Blake's struggle is decently handled, and the climax where Yang confronts her by opening up about her own past and then overpowering Blake to show how she wouldn't stand a chance at her frazzled state was nice. It's a moment that recontextualizes Yang in all of her grief and confusion, rarely letting it show around her sister, so that what nearly befell her and RWBY would never happen again. It does make some of Yang's V1 interactions come across extremely awkwardly in hindsight, only further proving that Miles, Carrie, and Monty really had no idea what they wanted our MCs to be for like half a volume. But still, it's a nice conclusion to Blake's character arc, which on paper seems engaging. We're seeing one of our MCs drag themselves through a mental low point out of paranoia, so that another can reveal sensitive information about themselves and strengthen the bond between the two. The problem is how we got here. In Chapter 1, Blake didn't really feel this at all, and she only got spooked following the death of Tuxin earlier that chapter, which she almost certainly didn't know about until later in the day after what we got to see. The death of a fellow White Fang deserter would probably ruffle her up a bit, as she likely had some history with Tuxin in this regard. However, the connections aren't drawn upon at all in universe. Tuxin means nothing to anyone here beyond just being someone with a hit on him so that Blake could get upset. And she doesn't even openly comment on the fact that he was assassinated. This is a recurring issue with RWBY, where they often won't emphasize something important to the characters because I guess the audience is supposed to do all the emotional and psychological connections for them. We're not engaging with the characters meaningfully through picking up on subtleties or seeing them engage with pertinent information that would affect them. We're putting missing pieces in the holes that vaguely have their shape. We're not encouraged to draw intelligent inferences. We're having to do the heavy lifting for the writers. As such, Blake's arc rings a little hollow and feels rushed. Tuxin was a character introduced and killed off in the first scene of the volume to establish the new threats working with Roman, and how their heavy-handedness is getting in the way of the more secretive approach Roman and the try-hard edgelord girlboss collaborator Cinder have been trying to take. It feels like there just wasn't a ton of forethought on how we'd get to this arc, and like they didn't want to link it to the end of the previous volume too hard outside of Ozpin questioning how Blake knew about the White Fang operating at the docks. It honestly would have hit harder at this rate if by the start of the volume, she had already been noticing White Fang reports popping up, considering how Roman literally starts this volume having stolen so much dust that it immediately renders the ending of Volume 1 meaningless from a plot perspective. It barely even amounted to a setback, and now through the death of Tuxin, which didn't seem to actively leave any White Fang traces behind outside of the fact that he was a former member who was assassinated, this is how we get to Blake's arc. It's done with such little direct connection that it feels borderline coincidental, timed perfectly to where Blake's arc would start in a way that comes off as her reading a script as opposed to naturally reacting to the world around her. This sets a really bad precedent for how the plot of Volume 2, as well as the show moving forward, would carry itself, relying on blatant contrivances and justifying character paths and decisions through the most threadbare connections and straight up missing pieces. It's a shame since, again, I do like Blake's character arc in theory, and in execution, it does work fine once you get past how it's all set up. It's just that the impetus is so undercooked that it bogs the whole thing down significantly. I actually used to love this arc when I was a stressed out teenager who would let certain fixations and fears drag me down a bit, and I still do sorta relate today. However, the arc that once made Blake my favorite of the group isn't exactly doing so again this go around. The woes of life experience and critical thinking, that tells ya. I do like how during the campfire scene in chapter 10, she opens up to Weiss and Yang about feeling aimless, having run away from problems constantly and jumping to new concepts without any imagination or forethought on how she'd utilize or contribute to them long term. She's an activist at heart and one who knows how to fight, but she still doesn't know how being a huntress will actually aid her in her fight for faunus equality beyond killing Grimm and I guess fighting the White Fang now. But of course, revolution requires more than just fighting the bad guys when they do bad things out in the open, and she doesn't want any of what comes next to resemble the path the White Fang slowly underwent. Also, nobody in the organization, sans I guess Roman, seems to recognize her at all, not even guys like the Chainsaw Man, who clearly aren't fresh newbies like the rest. So that's a little weird. Would have been nice to show how some people there are clearly bitter about her leaving, and how now they have an idea of where she is, so that can lead into next volume. Weiss doesn't really have much of an arc to dissect, but I do have problems with her as well. Namely that she seems to have gone to the Kirito school of character development. Remember the racism in general looking down on others she had in Volume 1? Well, I guess outside of hard rejecting John's constant and embarrassing advances in suitably rude ways, all of her douchiness is gone. We get no actual on-screen development where she tries to tone herself down and make strides to drop her racism while accidentally letting some sketch slip. After she said she no longer cared about Blake's past at the end of Volume 1, BAM! The racism files were patched out. You know, because you can totally unlearn dangerous beliefs instilled through a combination of family values and childhood trauma after like 2 days, right? That's totally sensible and realistic. That's good storytelling and character writing, right? So yeah, that's pretty underwhelming. But I guess I should be used to characters dropping core aspects of themselves without warning or exploration after what happened with Ruby's weapons geeking halfway through Volume 1. And this is actually what makes her confession so odd in the aforementioned campfire scene. It only works when viewed under the lens of Volume 2 dropping Weiss's racism stat to 0, since all of the actual effort and self-reflection that would have gone into shedding her family's bigoted ways were dealt with off-screen, it seems. The idea that she wants to become a huntress to do something better with the family name than her father, who has been running her family company's reputation to the ground, is kinda interesting. It also makes it seem like the horrible views and actions have been localized to just her generation and her parents. It's an interesting wrinkle to her character, but it's at odds with pretty much everything V1 presented us with, and we don't get to see her reflect on how much of her attitude and behaviors during the first semester have reflected poorly on her journey. Remember when she got all defensive about Weiss pointing out her family's controversial labor practices? Neither does RWBY, I guess.
This same company, infamous for its controversial labor forces and questionable business partners.
What? How dare! The nerve of...
Our business is operated in a
Moral gray area. That's putting it lightly.
Which is why I feel the need to make things right.
So now at best, Weiss is typically known as the asshole ice queen now, and not the girl who was working through her racist tendencies to better herself. I like how we're seeing more of her daddy issues. I like the nod to her elder sister Winter, who would make her official debut in the next volume. And I consider Weiss to be fairly funny this volume. She constantly reacts to her Ice Queen reputation and not being labeled in the Friends and Sisters camp during RWBY's Best Day Ever planned speech at the start of the volume.
Sisters! Friends! Weiss. Hey!
Her tsundere straight man role is done pretty well here. And I do like this moment she has after the Paladin fight where she attempts to pull a Yang.
I guess she really made our plans fall apart.
Huh? No. Just no.
What? But you do it.
There's a time and a place for jokes.
Was this not it?
No, it just wasn't very good.
Well, at least I'm trying.
And I especially like her and Blake's polar opposite reactions to RWBY and Yang's dog being shipped to Bacon for a few days. So yeah, just because I criticize the efforts the show makes to add more substance to these characters, doesn't mean I can't enjoy their presence on a moment-to-moment basis. It's just that if I gotta take the good with the bad, I do gotta point out the bad. But anyway, this is where RWBY comes in. RWBY's consistently likable this volume, and they have her down pat here, even if I'll still miss her weapons nut shenanigans. She's given extra dimensions through some of the adults, namely Ozpin and the absolute best character in all of RWBY, Dr. Professor Motherfucking Oobleck! After Yang and Weiss organize the dance and succeed at getting Blake to take the edge off herself for a bit, RWBY withdraws herself on account of struggling with high heels, opting to just watch over the party but separately from Yang. Ozpin tries to communicate to her that moments like this where she gets to be with her friends in peace should be cherished, and that they won't have such opportunities for much longer seeing as they'll be maturing on the battlefield.
It's not every day that friends are able to come together like this. Time has a way of testing our bonds, but it's nights like these that can help keep them stronger than ever. Nights like these are ones we'll never forget.
Much of Volume 2 has been a transition point where the menace is starting to creep into all the good times. And while the way they do that with the Antags is dreadful, this scene does a great job at highlighting the idea. Ozpin, well, we'll get to why he feels the regrets he does and tries to instill what he tries to instill once we get to Volume 6. For now though, he adds a reflective quality to the volume for RWBY to take a bit to pick up what he's putting down, since she'd rather be fighting or otherwise not be socializing in high heels. Oobleck then gives each member of Team RWBY something like this moment, with him asking 3 of the 4 individually what they've come to this line of work for. They each provide partial answers before spending half of the next chapter discussing the full versions, whereas RWBY gets shown some of the eldest Grimm in the show for the sake of teaching her more about these creatures she shouldn't be too gung-ho about killing. Even better, she asks him why he took up his profession, with his answer being perhaps the most profound out of anyone.
I see lives that could have been saved. As a huntsman, it is my job to protect the people. And although I am capable of doing it with traditional weaponry, I believe I can make a much larger impact if I do it with my mind. As a teacher, I'm able to take knowledge, the most powerful weapon of them all, and place it into the hands of every student that passes through my classroom. I look at this wasteland and I see lives that could have been saved. But I also see an opportunity to study these ruins and learn from this tragedy, and therefore become stronger. I am a huntsman, RWBY, because there is nothing else in this world I would rather be.
This strange, curt, hilarious, and energetic coffee addict with a machine gun mouth shows off a level of wisdom and nuance befitting a seasoned professor and embodying the best parts of the volume. Hell, as good as some of the main and side characters are, it's really the adults who shine brightest here. Sure, we get some nice John moments for him to redeem his character in chapters 6 and 7 after tanking V1's back half.
Nigga, are you praising Jean?
Damn, chill, bitch, chill!
Did I stutter? Are you praising Jean or not?
But anyway, sure, we get all that. And yeah, Sun's cool, and Neptune's a nice addition despite being a total carry insert Weiss gets to pine after. And hell, it's nice getting to actually flesh out Team Juniper while having a hilarious exchange with Ren and John that inadvertently points out V1's issue of trying to sell us on how close these guys are when we hardly ever saw them interact.
To be perfectly honest, I don't know that much about you personally, but darn it, I consider you to be the brother I never had.
And I you.
That, and during the dance, we get a choreographed dance number from Team Juniper. with it being one of the highlights of this entire section of the volume. However, it's Ozpin, Oobleck, and newcomer James Ironwood that give us much of the material that elevates the show's standards of maturity. Standards that the show will fail to meet later on, more on that in volumes 6 through 9. And hell, revisiting Ironwood here really makes me appreciate how much they set him up for what his trajectory is meant to be in volumes 4 and 7. Then I remember what became of him in volume 8, and suddenly my wood turns from iron to jello. Outside of some of the better character moments in this volume, and a lot of the humor, it's difficult to take volume 2's endeavors seriously. It's really weird whenever Weiss, Sun, or Neptune do something out of character and ridiculous for the sake of a joke. It's downright impossible to take the new big bad Cinder seriously, since as much as I like Jessica Nigri, the voice direction she was given just makes Cinder sound like a perpetual try-hard edgelord with no depth or charisma. So basically what she's like in volumes 5 through 8. Cinder is the most one-dimensional character in the early part of the show, even more so than Cardin from Volume 1, since at least he can display more than one emotion. And Cinder doesn't have a level of menace or hammy charisma to make her fun like Roman Torchwick, not that he had the former anyway. It's so hard to take Cinder, Emerald, or Mercury seriously when the show really wants to make all of their interactions while infiltrating the school look all like, ooh, they're so evil. These losers got no aura whatsoever, and they barely even get to be funny. Worse yet though is, again, that damn plot. The reason why the middle batch of episodes with the school dance is by far the best of these two volumes is because most of it is nothing but character stuff and baller Pyrrha fights. The first arc immediately kills what little impact the ending of Volume 1 had, relies on severe contrivances to do anything with Penny, and makes the new Paladin mech look like a joke when our main team can dispatch it without taking much damage outside of Yang, who had her semblance retconned because RWBY's lore is a fucking joke, and the concept of consistency is its biggest punchline.
With each hit, she gets stronger, and she uses that energy to fight back. That's what makes her special.
You.
You monster!
It also makes me wonder where all the huntsmen are in this fucking world, because clearly there aren't any stationed in the inner city of Vale aside from the professors, and no, the occasional cop doesn't count. Then we get the final arc, which starts off mostly good with Oobleck stuff regarding the team, his motivations, and RWBY's Cowboy Bebop Zwei. Now unfortunately, we already discussed how the campfire scene kinda breaks down when you remember how Yang and Weiss have been throughout the show up until this point. And it only gets worse from there. Then we get RWBY simply walking along a road, only for it to crumble beneath her, even though it's right outside where everyone's stationed, so everyone almost certainly treaded on it before, and there were no signs of it giving out until now. Volume 2 already had a problem with needing to contrive its way into fight scenes, and both that and the way it contrives our characters from point A to point B will come up again. But holy shit, this might actually be worse than RWBY getting butterfingers while pulling out her scroll just to facilitate her running into Penny. RWBY then also loses all physical strength for the remainder of the series, even though she wields a big ass sniper rifle scythe on the regular, carried Penny using her super speed semblance despite the robot being a bit heavy for her, and broke the fucking walls with the sonic boom of her speed semblance. Actually, fuck off with this shit! I don't care how funny it is to see her get bitch smacked by some random goon after failing a punch. You can't pull this shit! She also just doesn't use her speed semblance for more than a split second while trying to escape Torchwick because we need to make her stupid enough for her team to actually have to get her out of a bind. We then spend the penultimate episode having Oobleck and co stop the White Fang Trang as the soldiers act like droids spouting off lines like,
"Get the human!"
Remember, these guys are supposed to be an oppressed minority group led astray by extreme terrorist militants. Oh, and because we really needed those one-on-one fights between Yang and Neo, Weiss and Chainsaw Man, and Blake and Roman, the girls just rush off even though clearly ganking the baddies is a much better idea. Oh, and RWBY, Oobleck, and Zwei are handling the goons and the mechs that refuse to shoot half the time up top. You know, those state-of-the-art Paladin mechs.
The Elysian Paladin! Now, we couldn't have them here for you today, but these mechanized battleships will be seen defending the borders of our kingdom within the year.
And then we get to the finale. And if the Grimm weren't enough of a joke last chapter or throughout all of Volume 1, this is the moment where any investment in the show's stakes should dissipate entirely, and the Mountain Glen tragedy becomes impossible to accept as an event that happened. Multiple Deathstalkers and Nevermores show up, as well as hundreds of other Grimm, some armored and some super armored, and nobody gets hurt. People clear out the streets before anyone can get attacked or killed. 12 students and like 2 Professor Huntsmen utterly clean house, kicking Grimm in the figurative and literal balls while silly butt rock plays and the characters take the situation as unseriously as possible. We also get lines like this.
You just destroyed my favorite clothing store. Prepare to die.
And Coco telling Velva to save her weapon she had been working on all semester, even though this would be the perfect time to use it. That moment is both immensely stupid and the ultimate indictment of how much of a non-threat the Grimm are. Holy shit. What a fucking joke, man. This finale is actually worse than the last one. Even if you consider the idea that this was maybe a fraction of what the citizens in the past faced back in Mountain Glen, if this absolute swarm of Grimm could be neutralized so fast and with no real mess outside of some property damage, then you'd have to probably throw wave after wave of those wise elephant Grimm and whatever the strongest Grimm species are on top of thousands of all the other Grimm out there, at least in terms of the ones that can go and remain underground, for this to be even remotely believable. Grimm have been nothing but a joke in this world for the past 2 volumes, and I genuinely cannot believe that these are supposed to be the apex predators against humanity. Fuck steaks, RWBY's a vegan series. Also, some other shit I don't care about involving security of the Vital Festival for Volume 3 happens, Roman gets arrested as a fall guy, and Mercury of all people is the only one to comment that a lot of faunus got trapped in the railways after Glenda repaired the hole. Yes, the bad guy communicating to his fellow mustache twirlers commented that upwards of 100 minorities are dead and buried in a proverbial coffin that housed all sorts of Grimm, the same fate that befell the citizens of Mountain Glen, and none of our Paragon social justice heroes bat an eye or think about it when they reflect on the day. What the actual fuck? Gee, I hope this kind of dangerously glib and irresponsible character writing doesn't infect the people we're supposed to be rooting for as the good guys later. So what else we got? Oh yeah. Rooster Teeth started actually airing a miniseries called World of Remnant a couple months prior to Volume 2, in order to be the definitive tome of RWBY's world building and lore for fans to refer to when you're having trouble keeping up with it in the show. Think of it like BlazBlue's Teach Me Miss Lychee mode, except it's not funny, we just have a narrator instead of having our characters interact, and it's kinda boring. Sure, the music's nice, but unfortunately, World of Remnant gets contradicted by the main show later on, and as already discussed, stuff like how Yang's semblance works were already changed between volumes 1 and 2. As such, it's neither helpful as a source to better understand the details of RWBY's setting, nor entertaining as a standalone piece of media in its own right. Of course, part of that is the fault of the main series. In some circles, Volume 2 would wind up being the black sheep of RWBY's golden age for its terrible overarching plot, retcons and unsatisfying resolutions to certain elements of Volume 1, the further dismantling of the show's already dire world building, agonizing contrivances, and an embarrassing finale. But that didn't stop the volume from being a massive success, or generally being treated as an improvement both back then and to this day. Hell, anecdotally speaking, this volume is where I joined the fray, as sometime after its conclusion back in 2015, I'd give both installments a shot. While 14-year-old me was fine with Volume 1, this entry was what really made me care about RWBY and its characters. V1 might have been a fine time, but V2 made me a fan, and I'd be more than on board for things to come for the next few years. As for the team over at Rooster Teeth, Volume 2 only further carried the momentum that the previous outing established for the RWBY IP. By the end of the volume and year, the series saw its first video game in RWBY Grim Eclipse. On top of that, Monty Oum would later get married to his wife Sheena, who was reportedly planned to have a role in the show through the character Winter in a certain document we'll get to later. Ultimately, even with some compromises and issues here and there, RWBY was a massive success that pushed its staff and studio to new heights. Unfortunately, while the hype train wasn't stopping, in many ways, the glory days were. We just didn't know it yet. On February 1st, 2015, at the age of 33, Monty Oum passed away following an allergic reaction to a medical procedure gone awry. His sudden passing during the early stages of Volume 3's production was a devastating blow to everyone. Perhaps the most dizzying part was the fact that he died so young that a large chunk of his show's early fanbase, or even the fans from his machinima days, might be somewhere around his age now. Monty Oum was a legend in the more independent side of the Western animation industry. Year after year, stories of how amazing and swell he was kept cropping up, reaffirming how his death left a hole in the hearts of millions, how he was an admirable man taken too soon. Fans, colleagues, friends, loved ones, creatives, just about everyone spoke of him with reverence. As for Miles, Carrie, Shane, and others at Rooster Teeth working on his dream, they continued doing so, wounded by the sudden death of their captain, their friend. They had to keep moving forward, just as he always said, and so they did. However, nothing would ever be the same again. During production of Volume 3, as detailed by Shane's letter, the style of how RWBY was made would shift. Back in Volumes 1 and 2, it had a more creator-driven environment, even if there were of course compromises made due to a larger team compared to when it was just Monty and later Shane working on the Volume 1 trailers. However, by Volume 3, things were reportedly messy regarding Monty's wife, Sheena, Shane's ability to work on RWBY, and ideas for engine-assisting tools that were vetoed in favor of the work pipeline, among other things. Afterwards, Rooster Teeth higher-ups would have even more authority over production, which, while natural for a professional project, kept clashing with how Shane and Monty rolled. There's a lot of other things detailed in the letter as well. Of course, this is simply one account from after Volume 3 had ended, and we'll address how fans reacted to the letter later. But given Shane's closeness with Monty and everyone at the core of what would affectionately be referred to as RWBY, this is a rather detailed look at how they were treated by RT's higher-ups. Regardless of your takeaway from his letter, keep it in the back of your head for now. Of course, with a more corporate-controlled production cycle, complete with RT having expanded in every conceivable way since Volume 2, it only made sense that they'd begin hiring some more big-name voice acting talents. This included recasting JJ Castillo with Yuri Lowenthal for the role of Mercury, hiring Elizabeth Maxwell for the role of Winter, and casting Vic Mignogna as Crow, back when his reputation wasn't in the mud. Lai Ren would be played by Monty's brother, Neith, seeing as Monty had passed and therefore couldn't reprise his role. Perhaps as a result of both the company's increased control over RWBY and the fallout of Monty's passing, RWBY Volume 3 would air in October 2015, 3 months after when Volumes 1 and 2 would air in their respective years, and the fall season would be where RWBY would premiere its new volumes up until Volume 9. Another standard set for RWBY moving forward was the establishment of certain departments, as explained by Gray Haddock.
Going into Volume 3, though, that we were really able to set up the pipeline how we had always wanted to do it for years and years. We were able to split out the responsibility of camera and layout off the shoulders of the animators and have our own camera and layout department.
Even with everything shifting and shaking, even with Monty's untimely passing, the staff endured, and so did the characters. The volume opens on a beautiful scene of RWBY visiting her mother's gravestone, recounting some of her adventures and some of how she's been feeling at this point. There's a level of vulnerability to both her and this scene that tells how, much like us and the staff at the time, she's scared and unsure as to how things will go. All that she could do was keep moving forward with the people around her. As the scene comes to a close, the show pans from the sunrise as a flock of birds recreates Monty's iconic signature before transitioning us into the volume proper. What follows is a tournament arc so bad that it's almost as awful as that of the Asterisk War. Okay, that's a little harsh. I only mean that for the first 5 chapters. The fights in Volume 3, and the 2 volumes following this, are a dramatic step down from Volume 2. It's not so bad in V3 once you get past the first quarter, but fuck, man. Those first 3 chapters have it rough. Shane Newville was still doing the best he can, and Chapter 4 onwards does bring us back to something resembling early RWBY standards, but with Monty gone and the production style shifting, you could tell how uneven things would be this time around. the 4v4 fights are completely lacking in any tight, fast-paced choreography, often resulting in strange attacking decisions and a general feeling of clunkiness and floatiness. Couple that with how characters are often just doing nothing until we see them, and how often they'll just stand around and bicker for extremely cringy gags instead of, well, fighting. Fights like the Team Juniper fight and the Team Sun fight in Chapter 2 are nothing short of painful to watch. Also, Team Funky exists, with the second black character of the show being named Flint Cole. I know it's supposed to be a reference to a Minecraft Let's Play, but come on, man! That's almost on the same level of, no, hold on. You're not supposed to be here. I was going to say Sia's music movie. There's a small story about him having a grudge against Weiss and her family before respecting her after the end of the battle, and their teams end on good terms. But still, what the fuck is this tone-deaf bullshit? Oh wait, it's RWBY, of course it's tone-deaf bullshit. Anyways, things get so much better when we're dealing with the 2v2s, 1v1s, and 2v1s, except for Winter vs. Crow. That fight, along with the other early brawls, relied so much on nauseating shaky cam and has a complete lack of decent choreography. It's just people doing big dumb fuck-off slashes and being too fast for pedestrians to follow because I guess this is just how we gotta show off what pro huntsmen can do when facing each other. It's a wonky spectacle, even when they're chasing each other and running atop structures. I know this is one of the more beloved fights of the volume, and this will probably be one of the most crucifixion-worthy opinions I state in this entire video, but yeah, this fight fucking sucks. The tournament itself also has some of the worst exposition in all of Beacon, with announcers interrupting their own game and footage to explain the rules to both the 2D paintings of audience members watching all across Beacon, and the audience in the real world watching this fucktacular series. I have no idea why people back in Volume 2 had to arrive what is presumably well over a month in advance for this tournament in the middle of their school semesters, and I'm doing that thing I said I wasn't gonna do, aren't I? Anyway, back to the audio visuals, I guess. Volume 3 would be the first time the show started incorporating 2D elements outside of just cutesy anime type expressions, as whenever they didn't have a character to render in 3D, they just make a static 2D drawing of them, which is really jarring. Even more surprising is how, despite V3 generally having weaker visuals than V2, apparently this was the entry that pushed Opposer software to its limits. As for the music in Volume 3, well, the music this volume might actually be my favorite in the entire show. We get engaging instrumental tracks such as When It Falls VXQ, and a piece I couldn't quite identify from the Destiny chapter scene where RWBY meets up with Velvet.
RWBY, how you going?
Hi, Velvet!
There's also some nice inserts like My Turn, which plays during the first fight of the volume, on top of V3 having the greatest number of inserts in the show up to this point. We also get my favorite opening in the Beacon trilogy, the edgiest shit When It Falls. Last but not least, we got the double whammy of the harsh and grandiose first ending theme, Divide, and the desponding second ending theme, Cold, both of which playing one after the other in the finale's end credits. Sure, Volume 1 might have my favorite instrumental track, but V3's OST might be the most well-rounded in terms of me liking every kind of thing it presents. I also did notice that in Crow's dodgy fight with Winter, we get to hear a motif that'll come up again in his very own theme song, but we'll save that for Volume 4. With the introduction of Crow and Winter, we actually get to see what's under the hood. Crow is an entertaining enough character in his own right, ridiculing the fights I thought sucked ass, and mocking some of the show's world building. However, he and everyone will all still be serious about this plot, and so will Pyrrha now that she's selected to be involved. We won't go too deep into some of the bigger picture stuff here. Volumes 4 and 6 will give us plenty to talk about when paired up with the information received in Volume 3. All I'll say is that when it comes to the maidens, the idea that they are kept secret because of explanations like how it'll cause a panic and that they don't want maiden powers falling into the wrong hands seems a little off. I kinda get it, but at the same time, considering how Grimm are attracted to people's negative emotions, we'll get to that later, wouldn't it be good for people to have more beacons of hope to latch onto? Then again, these magical beings aren't even that much more powerful than a good huntsman if Cinder, Emerald, and Mercury could take one of them down with only moderate at best difficulty. so I guess maybe they should be kept a secret and saved only for grim fighting missions. They seem overrated as fuck if Volume 3 is anything to go by, holy shit. Industry plan ass motherfucker. Anyways, back to Pyrrha. As the key takeaway for her is that, in order to become a maiden, she might have to give up her current life with John and the others entirely. Nobody knows if she'll survive the process of aura transfer. Nobody knows if she'll still be the same person if it works. And nobody has more than like a day to figure this shit out, considering how close the danger to the kingdom is. As such, Pyrrha struggles with the idea of having to sever her current life, including her friendships, and the love she has for John. Her crush tries his best to be there for her, but he can only do so much when Pyrrha's falling apart. And outside of some odd plot stuff later and a really stupid moment for John towards the end, this arc ends beautifully and tragically. As for that stupid plot stuff, we see Cinder and Co. change whatever their original plan was gonna be, to be hinged on the fact that now they know Penny is a robot. Considering how Cinder installed the chess piece hack back in Volume 2, I'm surprised how it took them this long to find something that would be so critical to how their plan would pan out, enough to have replaced whatever their original linchpin was going to be. They rigged the tournament to eventually make it so Yang fights Mercury and supposedly break his leg due to Emerald messing with her perception. They then do the same to Pyrrha, so that she panics with her polarity semblance and throws the wired swords back at Penny so hard they wrap around her body to tear it apart, I guess. What the fuck was the plan originally? And how come we didn't just have them discover it earlier so they can make it be like this from the start? We also see how Cinder recruited Mercury and Emerald, how they took down both phases of the Fall Maiden boss fight on co-op before Crow interrupted her maiden power pruning, and the initial failed attempt to recruit the White Fang before eventually blackmailing them the second time using her uber-strong maiden powers. Yeah, sure, I guess she's so much stronger than the Fall Maiden that even with only half of her power, she cleans house too easily for mega powerful Adam to consider taking down. Whatever. Though at the time we didn't really know how powerful he was. Also, Blake ends up going to Adam to ask what that was all about, and is clearly capable of seeing at least the backsides of Mercury and Emerald. So what, at no point in Beacon did she recognize how oddly familiar they looked and how they were trying to make a deal with the White Fang? Even with the generous interpretation that she only overheard what was going on and they escaped her line of sight when walking away just as she walked out in the open to question Adam. This show's asking a lot out of our suspension of disbelief. Granted, it does that all the time, but still. On that note, we get Cinder's speech about how Osmond's clearly not teaching his students well if they're brutalizing people and killing robots. And that in this time of peace, why is Atlas building robots disguised as students? Seems a bit fishy if you ask the ominous chess user hacking the live feed right after Penny's death to vague post about it. These men are up to no good. They suck. They couldn't even protect Vale when Grimm broke out on the streets, so Osmond wants to overcompensate for his colossal failure by kicking Atlas's ass. Oh, but hey, she could be wrong. She doesn't actually know who's the good guy or bad guy here. But those leaders are kinda sketchy, and Mistral ain't doing much better apparently, and peace is fragile, and we're on the brink of war, and no, goddammit, Twitterites, stop fact-checking me with your community notes! Stop ratioing me! Fuck! Yeah, I think you can already see the problem with this speech. It's such obvious shit-stirring bullshit that I can't believe nobody felt skeptical about it as it was happening. It's so blatantly fishing with the timing, the ominous red screen and esoteric symbol. It's just blatant fear-mongering meant to scare suckers, only sneaking in one potentially half-decent point amidst blatant crocs of shit. The bit that reeks the most is the colossal failure line because, well, we saw what happened in Volume 2. When the breach happened, that shit got cleaned out in like 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes our time, and probably like half an hour at most in canon. No reported civilian or combatant casualties, aside from all the minorities buried in the catacombs. Just a bit of property damage and people fleeing, and much of the former ended up being repaired quickly by Glinda. Every single Grimm at the scene was wiped out effortlessly. Nobody was even tired after it was over, except for the main four who had a bunch of fighting to do on the train beforehand. The Mountain Glen incident was such a wrap-up that the only failure was the fact that it happened at all. Hence why Osmond had to step down from the head of Vital Festival security. The fact that nobody went, hey, wait a minute, that got cleaned up quick. What does she mean, colossal failure? Is staggering to me. Also, yeah, about Atlas sneaking in robots that look like students. The crowd seemed pretty pleased with the 2.0 grunt models that were more visually friendly than the 1.0 models that got shown off back in Volume 2. Also, reminder that this is to fight Grimm and to attach an avatar of hope in that fight to something resembling a person. Kinda like those maidens that are not meant to use their powers too publicly despite being out and about all the time. At best, this could trigger the kinds of conspiracy theorists who think birds aren't real and who are deathly afraid of automation. Cinder's literally just preying off people's dissatisfaction with Yang's conduct and the confusion over Penny turning out to be a robot that got torn apart, to just throw in dogshit point after dogshit point to confuse suckers into a panic. And it works to an unbelievable degree. Now I'm just surprised grifters like Rev and Sneeko aren't more successful. But I'm not gonna get too hard into a political tangent for this politically driven show. It's not too important. What is important, aside from the fact that the unbelievability of this speech could have actually been used to the show's advantage if we had a fair amount of suckers believing that shit, and then a whole bunch of people who know literally anything just start shouting that no, this is all bullshit, and it just turns into a giant shitstorm, is the fact that this attracts hundreds of Grimm. Small fries like Beowulfs, medium enemies like the Nevermore, and those giant fucking ancient mammoth Grimm from Volume 2. They all sense the negativity coming from the stadium, and rush to attack both it and Beacon. And I think now's the time to talk about how Grimm work and how bullshit this whole thing is. How the hell has humanity managed to survive this long when Grimm eat people and are attracted to fear? Humanity has survived for thousands of years against these things, which are everywhere. In the water, across the land, in the air, and some of these creatures are like fucking wyverns and mammoths and shit. That'd be like humanity surviving in the age of dinosaurs, but the dinos have it out for them specifically. Now we've gone to a point where they're generally able to make their kingdoms Grimm-free. I guess this doesn't apply to Faunus, especially when the White Fang could just carry Grimm around in ships to throw out Beacon, I don't fucking know. How is it that there isn't a critical focus on fear prevention and mental health social systems when that's the main thing standing between society's survival and its collapse? All it took was for Cinder to spout propaganda after a robot was torn to shreds in front of a live tournament for the entire city to be fucked. And that's without the White Fang and Roman Torchwick making things worse. It's fucking ridiculous. These guys would be fucked if war ever broke out.
The Faunus Rice Revolution, more popularly known as the Faunus War.
The Great War. What a terrible name for such a horrible time in history.
This show is fundamentally broken. Its lore is fundamentally broken. There is no conceivable way they could have ever survived a world war. But hey, now that we're here, let's talk about the part of the show that makes this volume for everyone. Volume 3 is a sacred cow, widely considered the best installment in the franchise, only sometimes rivaled by 4, 6, and now 9 depending on who you ask. Even though a lot of RWBY fans agree that this show fell off harder than a mediocre Twitter user, V3 is usually held in high regard, at least its final third is. You don't talk shit about that. Even those who watch it now are caught off guard. Detractors like H-Bomber Guy at the time would often get here and go, whoa, where was this show? While for those of us who caught it live after following the series before Monty's death, it was basically the eclipse for Zoomers, or the Shibuya incident for early Zoomers. Meanwhile for the characters, it was basically their 9/11. But I don't think it hits nearly as hard as it should.
Whoa. What do you think you're doing? You said to yourself the fall of Beacon is a sacred cow. You can't just talk shit like that.
Yeah, dude, even I'm not that much of an asshole.
I mean, Kaiser, you are. But come on, guys! I'm right!
Alright, that's it. Hop on BB Tag, you fuck ass. I'm gonna be playing Yang, and you're gonna sit there and take 5B like a bitch.
No! It's kinda ridiculous how, in the Grimm invasion, we have like, what? 20 or 30 student huntsmen and 5 professionals fighting? Not even all of the finalists that made it to the 1v1 top 8 joined the fray, because I guess the dudes who were clearly just 2D concept art couldn't be made in time. So many students are just running away instead of calling up their weapon lockers like RWBY and much of the supporting cast did. Plus, as we all know, Grimm are such a non-threat that it's difficult to take that aspect of the fall of Beacon seriously. Hell, in the middle of what's become a battlefield, Weiss and Blake don't get attacked by any of the Grimm running around. I get they want to sell the terror of this threat, and I know it would be a headache for the software and the animation team as a whole to try to go all in on getting more students to join the fight, but seeing as pretty much only the named characters participate when the school has probably hundreds of combatants, and there's like a couple thousand people here in general, many of whom are students themselves, yeah, no, this doesn't work. Then we get to Velvet, a character who has been present since Volume 1, back when she was with the first years and not her team for some reason. So she was vulnerable to bullying when otherwise her team would have whooped Cardin. You might remember how at the end of Volume 2, Coco told her not to bust out her weapon she spent all semester working on off-screen. Here in V3, we see her taking pictures of what turns out to just be Sun's weapon before taking a pic of Ruby. Then we see her, the rest of Team Coffee, and several others go up against two Paladin 2.0 mechs that have gone rogue on account of the chest hack from Volume 2, finally infecting Atlas's vital security. Nobody can lay a dent on these superior paladins, until Velvet is allowed to bust out her weapon like she should have done this entire fucking time. Turns out, her weapon's a digitization of nearly every weapon one of the main characters we've been following has used, complete with referencing Ruby's pose from the Red trailer. She utterly decimates both of these paladins because I guess these are just fundamentally better than the actual weapons the students have been using. And everyone just lets her do her thing for a couple minutes before jumping back in to help. Don't get me wrong, the usage of I May Fall from the Volume 1 soundtrack was baller. And it's always nice to see the students work together to get a triumphant moment in a dire situation, unlike the cakewalk of Volume 2's finale, or the complete and utter lack of that in Volume 1's back half. That said, come on, this was some goofy-ass fan service. Outside of that, Team Coffee as a whole is a great example of the character bloat RWBY has suffered from, as now that it's trying to have all of these payoffs for characters we barely know or who barely interacted with each other, none of this lands quite as well as it should. The volumes are already way too short for even our main cast and main secondaries to get the attention they deserve, especially Volume 1. And we're still adding on several other groups of students and whatnot. And that's why you'll barely see any of them ever again in the next 6 volumes, even when it would make sense for them to be at least a little bit relevant. My last notable complaint is with Adam Taurus, the closest we've seen to a White Fang head honcho at this point in the series. Earlier in the volume, when the Chainsaw Man from Volume 2, who's totally fucking dead now, we'll never see him again, reassures Adam that he'll find Blake eventually, Adam tells him,
"Forget it. It's time I return to Mistraland."
It sounded like he was still hurt from his partner's departure, but more than willing to put the movement first and foremost. Here, he's basically a vengeful r/nice guy type of ex-lover, with some frankly awkward dialogue that doesn't make him sound that menacing.
"Hello, my darling. Is that what you've become, my love? A coward?"
It also calls into question if Blake had ever known about his feelings for her, and if she understood the sacrifice her decision to escape a corrupt movement would have on his emotional state, considering he doesn't really react to any of that stuff, and only reacts to the fact that he's here. It's a good thing he's as powerful as he is, and that his baller sword and aesthetic can sell him in this intense, burning building they're fighting in. Still, he feels far less compelling now, even though he still references how he views his movement, while centering it around how he and Blake could have had it all. Now he wants to take stock in destroying every part of the life she built for herself. But yeah, other than all that, this final act is still pretty enjoyable. I do feel like if we actually got to flesh out everyone's character dynamics and actually explore Beacon Academy, like, at all, that this would have hit even harder, especially in terms of the deaths on the students' side. I do mostly blame Volume 1 for this, but the short 2.5 to 3-ish hour runtime for the actually pretty plot-heavy Volumes 2 and 3, with a cast as big as this, didn't help in the slightest. Obviously, those issues are much worse in V1 and a lot of the later volumes, but it does limit the potential of this finale a good bit. It doesn't really hit like it used to, though part of why is also because, to be frank, you just had to be there. The show's creator, a well-regarded individual, died at a soberingly young age, leaving his friends and team to pick up the pieces. And since the fans' relationship with RWBY was more parasocial than most fan and creative team dynamics, it only hit us that much harder. Then we saw this setting collapse over the course of weeks, watching our characters suffer and sometimes die. It's like we're experiencing some of that pain over again. When you combine that with where the characters are in the final minutes, the second ED theme, Cold, with the Monty Oum signature at the start of the volume, and with the final message in the end credits, going through all that in real time was something else. Volume 3 wasn't just a slow implosion of a setting that monumentally altered the trajectory of the show's narrative and took away some of our favorite characters. It was a harrowing experience of grief for a man taken far too soon and who had so much more to offer to the world and to us. Of course, that was a decade ago, and what we have now can still be appreciated outside of the uniquely devastating context in which it was made. Not only did we get some engaging fights like RWBY vs Neo and Roman and Pyrrha vs Cinder, it also made for some exciting payoffs. After RWBY pulls a fast one to send Neo floating away from the airship they were fighting on, Roman beats the shit out of RWBY while he berates her for how insufficient her idealism is for a world as cold, chaotic, and uncaring as this, before being eaten alive by some random Nevermore mid-speech. Not only is it a moment of cruel irony considering he said he was going to
lie, steal, cheat, and survive!
But it also leaves RWBY in an interesting position regarding her worldview. Of course, she can't exactly explore that right now. After all, she's focused on doing what she can to stop this invasion. Yang's relationship with Blake is also questioned a bit when Blake compares what Yang seemingly did to Mercury to the start of Atom's moral downward spiral before asking her to reassure her that it was a result of her being attacked first. This scene itself isn't very convincing, but that's not the point. Seeing Blake's past catch up to her in the most violent way possible, and watching Yang lose her fucking arm to Atom for trying to stop all of it, is certainly an experience. Watching Blake apologize in tears for failing to protect her, and then learning from a bitter Yang sometime later that she eventually ran without even saying goodbye, adds some monumental wrinkles to this relationship. It's a huge series of shocks that will inform both characters and their relationship for the next several volumes. I doubt most of us think the show writers had it in them. Speaking of relationships, Penny and RWBY's relationship had been just established enough for it to mean something when RWBY had to see Penny die and start crying about it. Even if the road to facilitate that was clumsy, and the way the show went about making that the trigger for Cinder to start fear-mongering to the stadium into bringing enough Grimm to kickstart the invasion was still fucking horseshit. Seeing all of our huntsmen and professors, few of them as there were, do what they can to protect everyone in the stadium while the students were told to either flee or help the city below was pretty fun. All the little set pieces and the way the students had to overcome a serious threat by working together, good shit, satisfying stuff right there. Even considering how devastating the consequences of this final act were in-universe for our characters, it's a fun spectacle to revisit. With that, we finally circle back to Pyrrha and how her arc is completed. Pyrrha is easily the most fully realized character of this saga, with an arc that's pretty well done from start to finish. The way it plays out here is brutal. Seeing her scream in pain during the aura transfer, which lets Dawn do the stupid and stop actually protecting her for the 20 seconds Cinder needed to get an opening to kill the Fall Maiden, and seeing Pyrrha have to kiss John and send him off, that was engaging stuff right there, mostly. She worried so much about having to throw this life away, and the process was just as painful physically as the lead up was emotionally, even though Cinder took the power in the end and Ozpin was seemingly vanquished soon after. When she kissed the man she had been crushing on all this time and sent him off so she could fight Cinder on her own, that's when she knew, for all intents and purposes, that she was dead. The old life was behind her, the destiny she was promised was no more, and all that was left was the destiny of doing what she could to protect the world by fending off Cinder for as long as she possibly could. Pyrrha may be unreasonably powerful by student standards, but she's no pro-huntsman like Crow or Winter. Worse yet, Cinder's a maiden now, and even taking that out of the equation, she already seemed to be the most powerful character in the show at this point. No matter what Pyrrha threw at her, both from her own arsenal and from that shattered environment in which they fought, Cinder didn't have too much of an issue putting her down, and RWBY had arrived just in time to get front row seats to Pyrrha's execution. We get this beautiful shot of the horrified look on one of her eyes as she processes what she just witnessed before freaking out in a burst of light, freezing not just Cinder, but the wyvern Grimm that had surrounded the tower. Is this reveal kind of an asspull considering the last time we even referenced Silver Eyes was a one-off line in Volume 1? Yes. Is it weird how she knows Cinder's name when being resentful of her killing Pyrrha, even though they had only ran into each other like once, and Ruby didn't even see the match Cinder participated in at the start of the volume? Yes. Is the scene transition from this to the time Ruby spent in a coma before we see the white screen end and Ruby wake up baller as hell? Yes. Does the impact of Ruby losing Pyrrha lose some of its oomph when you consider how we hardly got to see the two exchange more than like 2 lines to each other and they just straight up never have a one-on-one moment, even in the 5 scenes both teams spent with each other? Yes. Does it still hurt when Ruby registers the fact that she just saw Pyrrha die and begins breaking down in tears? Yes. Pyrrha was one of the better characters in the show, and a character I still like in these early volumes has to deal with that loss. By the end of it all, Weiss has been dragged back to Atlas by her 2D father, Blake dipped out of fear and guilt, and Yang is pushing everyone away out of her own misery over everything that has transpired, including Ruby, who still expresses love for her wounded sister. Crow gave her a destination for once she finished recovering from the coma the mysterious power she had put her in, and we even get to see her father, Tai Yang, for the 2nd time in the series. We saw him as a static 2D image with no lines in the first chapter of Volume 3, and maybe seeing him at all in any previous volume rather than just alluding to him once or twice would have made this more impactful, but point is, Ruby's off with John, Ren, and Nora now to pick up the pieces and set off while we get our first glimpse of the true thread of the series. All in all, this was a flawed yet engaging final act to an otherwise mediocre and frankly stupid volume. V3 is almost acceptable, probably closer to Volume 2, but honestly, I think I enjoyed it less. The humor in the first half was inconsistent, with a lot of duds in the tournament fights in particular. V3 doesn't quite have the charm or rapid-fire nature of V2, and it isn't a character-focused volume like that one was. However, at least this finale wasn't worse than Smegma, and at least the arcs it works with are fully, or at least largely earned. It's just still really dumb. It screws over elements of Volume 2 just as hard as that volume did with Volume 1. Like making Neptune a total bitch whose womanizing has been amped up to 11, and negating the post-credit stinger from V2 where Yang met her biological mother who saved her earlier. Guess since the fight Raven was supposed to have got cut, the most we can do now is get Crow to tell Yang that her mother said, "I saved you once, and once is all you get," before telling her that he might point her in her mother's direction sometime. Guess the stinger was all a dream, I don't know. Regardless, Volume 3 came, tore the fandom's world apart, and left so that everyone can pick up the pieces for the next 8-ish months. The volume ended in February of 2016. As I mentioned, the reception of this volume was a big leap from the previous two. Even now, when you look at the websites like IMDb or Serialized, the scores for Volumes 1 and 2 are sorta fine, while Volume 3's scores are pretty good, and the highest rated episodes are still among the highest in the series. RWBY was no longer just this curious web series by a respected machinima animator and the Red vs. Blue team. It became a franchise, an epic, a series whose standards had risen exponentially, and we'll see how that affected future volumes soon enough. Speaking of RWBY's growth as a franchise, we got the start of the 12-chapter Shiro Mio manga for RWBY. We also got RWBY Chibi, a small, referential gag comedy for fans who wanted some more comedy and general lightheartedness from RWBY after what happened at the end of Volume 3. This also allowed us to keep getting some more Roman Torchwick for a while. RWBY Grim Eclipse went from a demo release to a complete PC and Mac release later in the summer. The franchise was chugging along, and there was plenty of work the team had to do, though it wasn't going to be easy. After being let go in January 2016, so before the end of Volume 3, Shane would release an open letter on May 12th, detailing his grievances with the company and several aspects of his life since 2007, which have left him in an emotional and mental low point. I've already discussed some of the details, but ultimately, the final takeaway I haven't described yet was how it impacted the fanbase. According to longtime RWBYtuber The Judgmental Critter, the letter was incredibly divisive in its reception.
Suddenly, overnight, the fandom was proverbially split in half. Some people who thought Shane was being hyperbolic and blowing things out of proportions, specifically to spite a company for various reasons. The other half was certain Rooster Teeth was this evil corporation, desperate to erase everything Monty loved and cared about, and puppeteer his works solely for the purpose of getting as much money out of his creative genius as possible.
In a way, you could see this letter as the first major split in a fandom that, over time, would become irrevocably fractured. One might even see this letter as the end of RWBY's glory days, and the start of the Great Divide. Till next time. Hey y'all, Editing Bay CBF here. Just recording this bit at the end of the video to tell y'all that if you enjoyed what you just saw here and would like to see more, feel free to consider supporting me over on Ko-fi for now. Donations start at $1, and monthly supporters will get access to my brand new Discord server, where me and a whole bunch of my friends are hanging out, and either weekly or bi-weekly, I'll regularly host album group listens for everyone to join in. How we're actually doing a new thing where every time I miss a deadline, I have to do a punishment game where I listen to an album from a band or artist I can't stand, including this very week because I missed the deadline for this video several times. So if you want to support me because you like my content or you want to watch me suffer, well, here you go. Oh, and you guys already know the whole like, share, and subscribe business, I don't need to tell y'all to do that. Thanks for watching, hope you'll stop by, and I'll see you in the next one.